Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final session of the conference. And I think you'll all agree that this conference was not only timely, but it was so important that we meet. Thank you to each one of you for travelling so far. Thank you to each one of you who commits their time, their energy and their dedication to what is the hard work of development. I couldn't help but noticing throughout the conference, everybody is sitting in groups of 2s, 3s, 10s, and together sharing their experiences and connecting. And thank you for not being spectators at this event. Thank you to the session chairs and thank you to the organisers. Rebecca Bryant, thank you for your leadership of bringing all of the support teams together. And also to Ian Satchwell for all of the work behind the scenes to bring this event together, which I think you'll agree has been a really tremendous conference. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Euro Nation, and my respects to elders past and present, elders and people like Doris Eaton who make us very proud. I'm Megan Clark, I'm Chief Executive of CSIRO, the National Research Organisation, and here I'm a member of the Australian Mining for Development Advisory Board and happy to be learning quite a bit at this conference. We started this conference with Parliamentary Secretary Lee highlighting the contribution that mining has made to this country. He went right back to the gold rush days. From my perspective, my grandfather walked behind the Afghan camel trains in the gold rushes of Western Australia. If he'd been more successful at finding gold, my story might have been a little different. He was pretty hopeless and ended up as a butcher. But it really resonated. That's the history of our nation. But as Eric Solheim reminded us, that is not necessary and doesn't necessarily lead to the development and inclusion that you would expect around the world, and as he shared the examples in North Korea and elsewhere. I'm going to attribute to Eric the Norwegian Five. No, this is not Eurovision. And the Norwegian Five, I think he outlined, was leadership, good governance, tax, hard work and smart work. Other than tax, it sounds like how I speak to my children. He told the story of his discussion with President Lula and contemplating 78% tax for the petroleum companies. But what he highlighted was that success is not necessarily a given globally, and it needs the efforts of everyone in this room, our nations at all levels of government. AusAid Director General Peter Baxter explained why developing nations are asking Australia and AusAid to step up and contribute globally in this area of mining exploration as we shift from mining exploration to production. And I use the word inviting very carefully. One of the themes that came through this conference is that we are experiencing a tremendous shift of capital around the world. We're at a period where we're shifting from exploration in the developing nations to production in the developing nations, and with that shift comes the need for transparency, for leadership, for governance, for long-term plans that invest in the people on the ground. Mark Lowcock from the UK Development Agency really highlighted this shift of capital and what it means and why that accountability is so important, and of course the timeliness of this conference and the importance of governance. He also spoke of the need for a coherent long-term strategy to convert that into the resources of human beings, of people on the ground. Gudrun Kopp shared with us the German government experience and the commitment to building value chains, the legal frameworks, the taxation. She shared the experience of companies being required to be transparent in payments greater than €100,000 to government. Tangible examples of how we move from talking about governance to real things, and stress the need for education and training. Daniel Kaufman from Revenue Watch spoke of the importance of data to underpin our policy development based on evidence. It was interesting to see that 80% of the resource-rich countries did not have satisfactory governance standards in place, and yet we also saw coming out of Latin America, that there is the possibility of emerging good governance and some of the great examples. Michael Ross last night challenged us with extending the EDI standards to transparency for industry. And Ume Waineti from the Oktedi region in Papua New Guinea, you left with us such an important reminder that without consulting women, you are missing half of the story, you are missing half of the potential of a nation. And you also reminded us that communities cannot be spectators in the activities that are happening around them. Powerful messages for us all to remember. And of course, it was personal and very powerful account of the challenges that are facing women in that region and how they engage in that dialogue. Catherine Heller from the World Bank urged us to look through that gender lens, and she noted that the risks are different, and so important to look through that lens. Helen Scosi from Oxfam reinforced that the impacts on mining are not gender neutral, and she stressed the need for gender impact assessments to understand and deeply ingrain those differences. Doris Eaton from the Yamaji Malpra community reminded us that mining changes the country forever. And she showed us images of her country. And therefore, the importance of ensuring that the benefits are meaningful and lasting. She spoke of the importance of women taking a stand and working with mining companies and men of the community, but she also reminded us that the gap can only be filled from the bottom up. Graham Hancock highlighted the importance of including women in the consultation process at the community, but he also noted that national governments must be committed to the outcome at local communities and to assess them. I mentioned that this conference was timely. It is timely because, as Professor Paul Collier reminded us, that we are moving from the commodity supercycle of discovery into a decade, perhaps a century, of extraction. And yet this afternoon we heard, let's hope that that is not a century of conflict. And Dame Meg reminded us that of the conflicts that we're seeing, 77% social and benefits distribution. I noted 45% of water. I know there are 1 billion people who live in areas where there is already water scarcity. There are another 1 billion people in areas that will be challenged for water scarcity over the next decades. And Aidan showed us the work that is being done to put the conflicts into context, to look at the underlying issues and to look at how we resolve them. Antonio Pedro, of course, outlined through his lens of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa the importance of sustainability hinging on the development of skills and going beyond the project gates. Ernesto, thank you for reminding us of the need for humility. You used the phrase that we come to each other's houses and we come into each other's lounge rooms. How is it that we could possibly forget the most simplest thing of politeness, of being invited, of asking, of being inclusive? It was so simple, something that we've all learnt from the smallest age. And yet how is it that we can forget that? He also reminded us of the power of the local entrepreneur who is hungry to establish themselves, and how do you unleash that power? And as Ume mentioned, communities can't be spectators in their own development. Representation is not enough. It's working through how it is those conversations can engage and turn into real outcomes, not just in the short term, but for the generations. And to all of you who have come to the conference and shared your experiences from around the world, we had Minister Sharani from Afghanistan sharing us the potential and the challenges. Peter Mewers from Fortescue Metals Group, the company's success in engaging local businesses. And he also showcased such a simple example of looking at the whole value chain, training connected with drug and alcohol testing, at the end of it, a job and a house. That's a value chain that can last for generations. A wonderful example. Gudrun raised the issue of demanding desalination in Chile. We had Carlos and Javier sharing what is happening in Latin America and Peru. Her Excellency, Dr. Esperanza Baez, sharing what is happening in Mozambique, the challenges as well as the enormous opportunities in a resource-rich country such as that. Her Excellency, Mrs. Sinkanesh Ejigu, shared the experiences in Ethiopia, and we heard as well this afternoon of what it's like in the Solomon Islands when 40% of your community is illiterate and the challenges. So we heard and shared experiences from whence we came, and we also had questions that arose from the floor that asked the question, is China missing from this conference? It is now a great pleasure for me to introduce our panel members, and first let me introduce the Right Honourable Claire Short. Claire is the Chair of EITI International Board and brings with her wonderful experience. She was the UK Secretary of State for International Development, the first to hold such a role in her country. And thank you for your efforts for lifting the UK budget and the contribution of UK in sustainable development over the last decades. Claire's been a Member of Parliament, the Shadow Minister for Women, the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport, and I'll be asking Claire just in a minute to come and speak with us. I wanted to introduce our three other panel members as well. They represent the next generation of leaders, and they're going to share their experiences. Maria Radyati, who is a lecturer at Trisakti University in Indonesia, and she's established a master's program focusing on corporate social responsibility. She's also participated in the International Mining for Development Centre's program here in October last year. Ishok Madhya is a surveyor and engineer with the Ministry of Mines in Afghanistan. He works in the area of coal, understanding the resources, describing them, and also the coal operations. He's currently undertaking a program at the International Centre, Mining for Development Centre at the University of Western Australia. And Vincent Kawamya, who's the Assistant Coordinator of the UNU INRA Mineral Resources Unit at the University of Zambia, and he is working to implement new master's programs in sustainable development and was an alumni of the International Mining for Development Centre program in September 2002. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Claire Short to the podium.
Well, thank you, Megan. I think you did a fabulous job of summarising the outcome of the conference. Thank you very much for that. Looking around, you all look slightly bedraggled, if I may say. I mean, you've been talked at an awful lot, valuably, but nonetheless talked at over these couple of days, and those of you who are staying on for the EITI conference, there's lots more work to do. So I've been asked to provide some comments about the EITI conference and the activities in Sydney for the rest of the week, and I promise you I'll be relatively brief so we have time for some questions and answers. There's a lot of you here who are involved with the EITI, but for those that aren't, it was founded 10 years ago on the idea that we were at the beginning of another commodity boom. We've had them in the past, when prices go up and there's lots of new development, and then the challenge for countries is to use that well for the development of their country, because they always come down again. The last one was after the end of the Second World War and the reconstruction of Europe, and then a massive need for minerals and so on for building that came down by the end of the 70s. And there'll be people here who remember in their countries, for example, Zambia, when copper prices went right up and then came down again. So we're in the midst of another boom, super cycle, largely because of the developments in China and Brazil and so on. And you'll all be aware of the way in which prices have gone up, and oil prices in particular have gone up. And although they're coming down slightly, it's not ending yet. But you can already see in China, they're talking about no longer forever being the manufacturing country for the world, and they've got to increase consumption in their country. So at some point, there will be a down. And the challenge is to use this opportunity, which has gone for more investigation and investment in poorer countries, because they tend to be the countries where there hasn't been so much exploitation in the past, and now there's going to be more production. The challenge is to make sure that those resources are well used and really lift up the poor of those countries and invest in sustainable things. Because, of course, people talk about sustainable mining. There's no such thing. Once you've taken the stuff out of the ground, it's gone. What's potentially sustainable is using it to invest in people, their abilities, the country, the future of its economy. And that's the challenge. So at the beginning of this, the NGOs, the Publish What You Pay coalition, which was then relatively small and has gone from strength to strength, spreading across the world, said to companies, why don't you publish what you pay? There's too much corruption starting to emerge as these big resources start to flow about. And it was that demand that led to the establishment of the EITI, the UK originally bringing together countries, companies, civil society to say, can we do something with this? Can we agree some principles? Can we agree that we'll use transparency to try to ensure that the benefits are used in a way that lifts up, developing countries and particularly benefits the poor of the world? This is a fantastic opportunity. Let's use it well. But it took some time, of course, to agree on principles, and then rules, and get an international board. How do you put that lovely principle into practice in reality right across the world? So 5 years ago, by then there was a secretariat in Oslo, an international board, which I now chair, used to be Peter Eigen, and more countries coming on board. There's now 37. There'll be another 2 during the course of our conference here in Sydney, and there's more lining up to join. Initially, a lot of the poorer countries came in. There's 20 odd of our 37 are in Africa, but it's spread and spread. Indonesia, Mongolia, the Stans, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and then more recently Norway. Australia's doing a pilot, as you know. 2 G8 countries are going to announce that they're joining up this week. So a global standard. Not just the North telling the South what to do and that transparency is good for them, but actually doing it itself. Everybody's saying, let's be open about this. This has been a murky sector all over the world. Hidden contracts, hidden deals. And then whenever that's going on, money tends to go to the wrong places and people feel aggrieved because they don't know what's going on. So let's open it up all over the world. And now we've got that kind of worldwide spread of the EITI. And I would say there's more to do on just achieving transparency, but the idea that there must be transparency in this sector, I think, is now entrenched. And it would be very hard for companies, governments, anyone to argue that it's right to keep the contracts secret, that you're not allowed to know what the revenues are or the production levels. I mean, we still haven't caught up with that everywhere, but I think across the world, everyone just expects it now. And that's a big achievement. But of course, the idea always was that transparency would lead to better accountability, that if you can get the facts out and the people know, then they can hold their governments responsible and make sure that companies pay a fair amount, the government spends the money on the right things, and you get long-term development in their countries. And I think, and this is coming on to what we're going to be doing in our EITI conference this week, we need now, having entrenched the idea of transparency and to take it to more countries and to improve it, but we need to strengthen the accountability side. There's more to be done on that. We've got figures running around, but with the Dodd-Frank figures, you know, the US is requiring all the companies in this sector listed in the US to publish what they pay to governments company by company, project by project, and the EU has now made the same kind of ruling. So we've got EITI reports with figures, we've got Dodd-Frank figures coming, we've got figures coming out of the EU requirements, and we've got to make sure we use the transparency. Otherwise, we could have so many figures that we can't digest them and use them and turn it into reality. And I just want to say, before I go on to the proposals that will, I think, enhance and improve the working of the EITI and that we're going to be talking about this week, to the representative from Zambia who asked in the last session, why were the conflicts and the troubles only in Africa? You know, in my country, the UK, which was early in the Industrial Revolution, there was horrendous conflict. I mean, the story of the miners, of women dragging coal with chains around their neck, with children working down the mines, with horrendous accidents, conflicts and riots. Don't think it's only in Africa. I mean, we had enormous troubles in the history of our country, but the challenge now is to learn from that and not repeat it. Learn from the mistakes other countries made that took them a long time and leap over that and do things right so that the development can take place more rapidly. But it's not just in Africa that there's been trouble. There's been trouble in most countries and regions where there has been mining. So the point of the EITI conference is bringing together this wonderful collection of representatives from countries all over the world to share experience, and we'll have an exhibition and each country will put forward what it's doing, and we do invite you to go around and see and learn from the actual practitioners about the different challenges in different countries, sharing experience with each other. We'll elect a new board to serve for another 2-3 years, and we'll build on the experience of the last 5 years to improve the accountability side of using transparency. So briefly, we churn out a lot of data, and that's important. That's what the transparency, its instrument, but some of it isn't quite good enough, and there'll be a tightening up and improving on the quality of the data and the speediness with which it's used. Because if you want parliaments, for example, to look at what's being produced and hold governments to account, they need data from current years, not years gone by that's a long time back that isn't useful to them. The EITI is a global standard, and there's basic rules about the transparency each country must comply with, but there'll be more flexibility in the new rules that each country adapts it to the challenges it's facing. So each country will be asked to do a work plan saying, yes, we're signing up to the ITI, but why are we doing this? What's the challenge in our country? What do we need to really focus on? Where have we got a particular problem? Because you've got countries ranging from, say, Peru, which is very decentralized and has massive rights for local government to manage resources, to a little country like Trinidad and Tobago. So there's obviously got to be a standard of transparency, but also a flexibility to adapt to where countries are and what they need. And similarly, a lot of the data in the past, I mean, nearly half the reports had the amounts, the revenues that companies paid to governments in one big number and not reported by each company. Hardly transparent, you might say, because they have to report separately to have it checked and then put it back into one big number. That will end, and the company by company reporting will go forward in the future, and shortly, almost certainly, project by project. Similarly, there are EITI reports now being churned out in country after country, supervised, as you know, by a local board convened by the government, but with companies and civil society coming together to supervise the process. But often those reports are quite complex and lots of figures, and how many people can manage them or crawl through them or use them. It's good that there's transparency, but there needs to be more context so that any concerned citizen could read a summary of what the findings are and be more informed about the size of the sector in their country, when it's going to be exhausted, what sort of quantities are being taken out, how much revenue is going to government, what proportion of the government revenues it is, what are the tax arrangements, and also a requirement that the figures be made machine readable so that there's more international comparability. So countries can say, what other countries are producing what we produce, and what kind of return are they getting, and are we getting a fair return? So all of these are the kind of changes that we're going to bring into place in the course of our conference that's following on from this. And I think that'll improve the work we're doing to get to that point where more and more people, country by country, understand the quantity and the context, and can have an informed debate about how best to use these resources for the benefit of their future and all their people. The issue of fair tax revenues is coming up and up the agenda, as you will have noticed. There's been scandal after scandal, particularly in the OECD countries, with suddenly big global companies, you find out they're not paying any tax. Now, there's a bit of hypocrisy in this, because there's been a problem about the paying of tax in developing countries for a long time, and no one particularly focused on it. But now it's hitting the OECD countries at a time of austerity when governments are short of revenues, and now there's going to be a lot of activity, and the UK is the chair of the G8 this year, driving forward efforts to make sure there's more transparency on tax payments and tax revenues. Now, it's not inevitable if the OECD countries move that developing countries get the benefit, but we must make sure that as they insist on proper supervision of fair taxation, that developing countries get the benefit of those reforms. And that's going to be, it's not a central EITI issue, but it comes on the back of the transparency that we can generate, and we must all work together to make sure that that is achieved. So, as has been said, this commodity boom, which isn't over, but it gives the chance for hundreds of millions of people across this world, including some of the poorest people, to have a better life and to see their children have better prospects. But if we leave things as they are, it is not inevitable that that will happen. It is the case that these revenues are difficult to manage. They tend to drive a rise in inequality. And that's happening all over the world and happening particularly in Africa. And as inequality rises, then economic growth brings relatively little benefit to the poor. In a more equal country, you know, the lowest incomes get more benefit out of economic growth. Because there's such big quantities of money that go in the investment, into the infrastructure and so on, and then the revenues that come, there's a real danger of a growth of corruption. And we've seen some of that in country after country. And conflict, which we talked about in the last session. So that's the challenge. That's why we're here. This is a historic opportunity for the world to use these resources responsibly, to make sure in the countries that are rich in these resources that they're properly managed and used, and that all the people get a benefit, particularly the poor, and there's something sustainable that's left behind that takes those countries forward. So all of you and all of us working through the EITI are precious actors in this, and we must get better at it in the next few years so that we achieve that objective, because it is not inevitable that we succeed, but it's perfectly possible that we would succeed, and that could be an enormous achievement and improve the life of countless people who deserve a better life. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take one question for Claire from the floor, if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. My name is Abdul Khalik Fazal. I'm the former Minister for Public Works and advisor to the President of Afghanistan. For the last 2 days, we've been hearing very constructive speeches from all sorts of mining and how to go about it, what to be done. Our main concern here is, and it's a question to you and to Dr. Clark as well, what should we Afghans do to encourage the Australian private sector, including the government, to take part in the mining sector in Afghanistan and to do the investments? We've been talking about Africa, we've spoke about other parts of the world, of course. Of course, everybody's got their own interests. And we are interested in all other areas as well, as our interest is mainly in Afghanistan at the moment. Despite all what's been going on and what's happening, His Excellency the Minister has given a good information in speech yesterday, and he has put everything on the table. What do you think we should do to further encourage the Australian private sector in the government to come and do investment in Afghanistan in the mining sector? Thank you.
Well, as you know, there's massive Chinese investment in Afghanistan because, of course, you're geographically near and they have such needs. And as we all know, talking of countries that have had a painful history and people who've suffered more than they should have. That is certainly true of the people of Afghanistan. And there are governance problems in Afghanistan, and there are corruption problems in Afghanistan. So you could say, and of course big new investment is coming in and new infrastructure because of the mining. Now, Afghanistan signed up to the EITI, and it seems to me you don't get perfection with transparency, but you prevent a lot of evils. I mean, if from even before there's any production, there's complete openness and everyone can scrutinize, the chances of things being better managed are much greater. And Afghanistan has signed up to that. So there's lots more to be done. I mean, you know, the resources could lift up the people of Afghanistan and guarantee it a better future, or different factions could fight over those resources. The resources can be used for the people, or they can be used to feed corruption. But you've made, or the country has made, the initial commitment to be completely transparent. And an effort must be made to really make that process work in the way I was trying to talk about. Not just churning out some figures that nobody looks at, but making sure that the figures are meaningful, that everyone in the country knows what's going on, that public opinion, parliamentarians, journalists, academics, international community hold those who manage the mines to account. So that's the hope, and it can be done.
Of course, one of the examples right here in terms of the investment that Australia is making is in the next generation of resources. I wanted to now open up the panel for our new leaders of the future to share their experiences. And given the questions on Afghanistan, I'm going to start with you, Ishaq. What do you see from your perspective going into what will be for you the next decades of your own leadership in your own country? What are the real issues that need to be addressed in Afghanistan?
Thank you for the question. Before to answer the question, I want to take the opportunity to express my warm appreciation to you all, and especially for IM4DC and AUSIT, which providing funding for me and for my colleagues to participate the Mining Governance Fellowship in Australia, as well for this conference. I am Ishaq Matyar from Afghanistan. I grew up in a small village in Daikundé province, which is far away one day drive from Kabul. Right now I work as a mining engineer in the Ministry of Mines and Petroleum in North Coal Department and Talo Barfak District Coal Mines. It's located in Baghlan province. This coal mine is also far from Kabul, and it's one day drive from Kabul. Regarding the question, there are many priorities for the mining for development in Afghanistan. There are many challenges for the mining for development in Afghanistan. For example, the first priority for the mining for development in Afghanistan is to build the infrastructure in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is a mountainous and landlocked country. And in the future, we will export a lot of mineral commodities to neighboring countries, for example, to China and India. Right now, some Chinese companies, some Chinese mining companies involved in mining in Afghanistan. On the other hand, we have a smallest border with China, but the border region is a mountainous area. There is no road, no transportation facility directly to China. For the sustainable mining development, we have to improve a good transportation system in Afghanistan, because, as I mentioned, Afghanistan is a mountainous country. There are many road projects is under the construction in Afghanistan. For example, the ring roads are under the construction. It's almost completed, I think. And another road project is under the construction, which connect the central provinces which is a really good project for mining in Afghanistan, because there is a huge solid minerals in the pegmatite zone in Afghanistan, and a pegmatite zone is located in the central part of Afghanistan. It's a transportation system for improvement, for development of mining in Afghanistan is really important for the next decade. And also the power is very important for development of mining in Afghanistan in the future. Right now we import the power from northern neighboring countries, for example, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. We import the power for the internal uses. But beside that, we have a huge resources energy in Afghanistan. For example, we have freshwater river, which has a high potential to build a hydraulic power plant. Also, we have coal deposits in northern part of Afghanistan, a huge coal deposit. And we have natural gas resources and crude oil, but it needs its investment and to build the energy and the power for the mining, for development in Afghanistan. It's power and transportation. These two things is very important for the next decade in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is really endowed with different kind of minerals, and it's remain anti-steel. It's a good factor for socio-economic development for the future of Afghanistan, as you mentioned. Another priority for the mining for development is the mining expertise is very important for Afghanistan. As you know, the 3 decades civil war damaged our national education. Right now we have a strong need to mining expertise in Afghanistan, and the government of Afghanistan recruit the international advisors in mining sector from different countries, and the government of Afghanistan looking for the capacity building of staff that work in mining sector and Ministry of Mines. And the government send the employees and staff to different countries. For example, as a good example, to Australia. Right now we came to Australia to learn something about the mining, because Australia has a great experience in the mining sector. Actually, in the last 10 years, we have a good start in mining sector. We learn here a lot of things to manage our natural resources in the right way. And also another priority issue is the investments. The government of Afghanistan looking for the international companies to come in Afghanistan and to start working and start investment in Afghanistan. We really hope for international companies to come in Afghanistan. And it's all the mineral resources is remaining touch in Afghanistan. I think it's a good opportunity for international mining companies to come in Afghanistan and earn money.
Thanks very much, Ishok. And you've got a room full of people who want to help young leaders like yourself. Maria, we've had a lot of talk at the conference about making it real at the local level. Tell us your experience in Indonesia.
Thank you very much again. I would also like to thank first for IM4DC, especially to SMI and also CSRM from University of Queensland, to Professor Salim Ali, Robin Evans, and Ian Southwell to help Indonesia delegation to come to the very valuable event. So I am Maria Radiati. I'm from Indonesia. I established 2 master degree programs, one with specialization in corporate social responsibility, and the other one is specialization in community entrepreneurship. the priority issues in the mining industry in Indonesia is first is local wisdom. Local wisdom needs to be understood and incorporated in their CSR strategy in mining industry. And number two is do not create kiss and run program. Kiss and run programs is actually programs that will not create sustainable impact. So it's not a sustainable program because it won't finish. It has to be sustainable impact that the company must create. So the reason why they create a kiss and run program is that because of their narrow understanding, narrow perception about CSR. CSR should be understood, for example, based on the guidance of social responsibility in ISO 26000, and it also encompasses the value chain of the business, which I call SIPOC, based on, from the supplier, input, process, output, and customer. So those SIPOC should be put into attention about how to create the positive impact from the SIPOC, scope. And then the reason number two is that companies do not measure the social return on investment from their CSR projects. So they only measure return on investment, we understand. But what about the social return on investment? They need to measure the impact that they have created to the community. And they also need to communicate the impact to the community as well as to the government. And then number three is that they do not facilitate or they do not build the capacity of the community to be able to organize themselves and then maintain the programs that have been created by the companies. So they won't make the company as the ATM machine, because every time they need something, they come to the company, they make proposals, and then one time it was successful, and then they will come again and again. So companies should help them by building their capacity to be able to manage themselves and then to maintain the program. So you imagine if, for example, one kiss and run program is to build a toilet with the company logo there. And then after a year, nobody maintained that. So, and then the company logo is there. So what happened? So things like that. So it has to be handed over to the community organization where we should teach them how to have the governance in the organization, maintain the asset and things like that. And number three is the importance of creating community enterprise. Creating community enterprise is important to build the dignity of the community. So most of the programs are, creating small, medium enterprises. But the thing is, it won't create social cohesion. Most of them creates envy amongst the small, medium entrepreneurs, But if you create community enterprise, then it will create social cohesion. So,
Thank you very much, Maria. And Kiss and Run is already trending on Twitter as we speak. And
Kiss and Run.
Vincent, the words capacity building, you probably could have checked them off your list over the last few days. But tell us what it really means for you. Tell us your story.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you, IM4DC. And being an African, I'll simply say all protocols are thanked for bringing us here. Well, let me just very quickly share with you my personal experience on some of the things which have been talked about here in the workshop. In particular, the last session, which you've just come from, and especially the theme which was downstairs, which is on building local entrepreneurship. Sometime in 2009, mid-2009, my two colleagues, fellow geologists, and I decided to participate in this area of exploration. And we decided to apply for what we call in Zambia small-scale prospecting license. In Zambia, a small-scale prospecting license has a maximum of 10 square kilometers and is reserved for Zambians. So we went ahead with my two colleagues. We applied, we did everything, and in Mid-2010, we were granted this small-scale prospecting license for rare earths, niobium, tantalum, and phosphates. And being geologists, we said we are going to do the basic work ourselves. We started packaging it with the hope of attracting partners so that we can work together in that small area and empower ourselves and empower the local communities. 1.5 years down the line, we simply started receiving conflicting claims over our tenement. We started receiving claims of people trespassing when we are not there. People are trespassing. Little did we know that a bigger company, bigger international company, has come because a bigger license is a maximum of 1,000 square kilometers. So it has got that 1,000 square kilometers, including our 10 square kilometers inside our area. And then we said, what's this now? We went to the minister, then we got involved, all of us now. We got into the web of claims and counterclaims, appeal and counterclaim, committees after committees. This went on for the whole of 2012. And the last time I heard something on that, it was early this year, and the matter has not yet resolved. But the irony of it is that now none of us can go into that area. The big company or ourselves, the small company, can't go there now to do any work. This is a typical example of how the projects can be delayed by simply not understanding between yourselves. So nothing has been done on this area for such a long time. So it's a typical example of a responsible company to try and work with the locals, because it's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for all of us for the downstream enterprise to create local employment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for sharing what it really means on the ground. I just want to ask our alumni one last question, just one thought. You're going back, you're young leaders. What are you going to do from this conference differently? How are you going to commit? Ishok?
Thank you. I learned a lot of useful things here in Australia when I go back to my job. I learned some technical issues in Western Australia and Kalgoorlie, in the School of Mining at Curtin University. I learned about mining planning and mine life planning process. I learned about the underground ventilation systems, which is really important for me because I work in coal mines. The underground ventilation system is really important for coal mines. And I learned about the occupational health and safety. It's also important as well as for me in the coal mines. Fortunately, the safety is good in North Coal Department where I work, but we have to improve the level of the safety and the level of health for workers in coal mines in North Coal Department because, as I mentioned, the 3 decades of Civil War, they damaged the systems. It's had an effect on mining sector in Afghanistan. We use a lot of workers inside the mines instead of machinery. We have to be careful about the occupational and health safety in the underground mining. And also, I introduced the SAMSoft mining software package. It's really helpful for me when I returned to Afghanistan. A lot of documents are not digitized where I work, and some of the software will help me to digitize some documentation information about the mining. And then we can put on the website on the internet, and it will be available for all of the people for all of the people of Afghanistan, and as well as for all of the people around the world. Those people who are interested about the mining in Afghanistan, they can get information. Also, I learned about the mining closure and mining rehabilitation, which is very important when I work in the government to inspect and to monitor some mining project in Afghanistan. In the future, it will be helpful for me.
Yeah, imagine if we were all setting up our countries now with the power of the internet, how we would approach it completely differently. These young leaders, of course, will start to enter that era with a completely different framework for information and data that we never had. And in my early career, I had to sit through a microfiche, and I'll tell you what that is later. Ishak and I were chatting, you know, what if you could imagine an Afghanistan where the drones of war were suddenly now replaced with their sensors and used for mining exploration, sensing and on-ground monitoring in a way that we don't have and would lead the world in that kind of technology. It's interesting to imagine. Thanks very much. Maria.
Okay, yeah. I will continue some of the works that we've been doing up to this moment. I will continue facilitating private sector and community to help the private sector, to help the community build community enterprise. And then I also want to continue our work in making guidance related to CSR or social responsibility based on ISO 26000, where the companies will understand how to build a community enterprise and then how to measure the impact, for example, by using social return on investment. And also now together with CSRM from University of Queensland, we would like to develop more curriculums to help companies to do capacity building, but we will emphasize on the pre-academic curriculum, which is practical and academic curriculum.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thanks. Wonderful things to take back. Vincent?
In Zambia, we have formed what we are calling Zambia Australia Alumni Association, ZAAA. With the help of the OZ office in Pretoria, we recently applied for a small grant. It has been granted to help us put together this association, which will include putting a website. Within this association, we intend to form a smaller one, the M4D Association. So really, when I get back to Zambia, me and my Zambian colleagues who are in the audience, we are going to use this platform to disseminate the great information we've gotten from here, what we have learned also before coming here to Sydney. We're in Brisbane. We got a lot of information there. We are going to use this platform to disseminate and move this initiative forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And I spoke once recently with a couple of the players from USAID, and I asked them, after decades of it being involved in the development space, what was the most important and long-lasting investment that they made. And in a nanosecond, they came back and said it was the investment we made in the young leaders that has paid dividend. And so it's great to see through the International Mining for Development Centres, the work of Ian, of Chris, the investment that we're making in you. And please make sure that you use all of the people at this conference as part of your network to support you in what you're trying to do. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you very much to our panel members. It leaves me with just a couple of small jobs to do. You have in your satchel the feedback form. We love feedback. Please provide it to the information desk. If you have headphones, please hand those in. Again, I wanted to thank all of you and for all of the people who have come to the conference. You have travelled a long way to participate, and I wanted to thank you, all of you. No one at this conference has been a spectator, and thank you very much for that.